We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Nicole Byer, helping you make those rooms flyer. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild! Like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Ooh, fierce! This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Kia ora, I'm Anke Richter, who wrote the bestseller Cult Trip, and I'm bringing you an exciting event. Get ready for Decult 2024, the first cult awareness conference in New Zealand, happening in Christchurch this October. Are you worried about a friend or family member who's in a group that may be causing them harm, or do you have your own story? Then join us for a weekend with experts from around the world, where those who've left culty groups can share their experiences and meet professionals who can help them. Head to our website decult.net for all the info.
That's quite interesting. I think you're being given the opportunity to speak with so many different young people that have grown up with so many of their own different and individual experiences. I don't know how many children would be given the experience to have those experiences.
Yeah, it was very interesting to meet people from all walks of life. Like, there was kind of a little bit of a Lebanese community there, and so I had like a lot of Lebanese friends, and like, you know, at that time period, Americans' attitude towards like Muslims and things like that was like very much filtered through, you know, what happened on 9/11,
right?
The Iraq War and things like that. And so, you know, as an American, not really understanding people from other religions and other backgrounds and stuff, like getting to know those people and like getting to see how they practice their religion and stuff was like, again, world shattering. I mean, just totally blew my mind at how kind and how amazing these people were versus like kind of what the American culture.
Oh wow!
What these people were.
It's so interesting to think about you having that sort of boy in the striped pajamas moment where you're coming into contact with people as opposed to a label. So, you know, sort of if you take Muslim as a derogatory label that may have been associated with that particular faith after the events of 9/11 and the extremist behaviors of the perpetrators involved, as opposed to each person that individually practices a relatively peaceful religion, and members of the Islam faith, to meet individuals and be able to realize that the derogatory label is not universal amongst every person that practices that faith. Again, even for a young person, as you said, must be earth-shattering. But I also wonder if the Christian faith, in the same way, is used as a tool of fear in Muslim communities, like it is used over in some parts of England and America. And if those people are meeting you and having those same revelations at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure from their perspective what they thought of like my sort of Pentecostal evangelical Christian culture. They might not even have a framework for it, but
or even just maybe even just Americans in general.
Yeah. Well, I know they had a few Americans that went to that school. So like, and again, these kids are exposed to people from all over the place. I mean, literally all over the world. I mean, I think there were kids even from Argentina there. So like these kids are exposed to like every type of culture and every type of religion. And what was cool about it was like they were all friends, you know. They were like there wasn't any real cultural or religious element like separating or like segregating them.
Right. And how
being exposed to that was like really influential.
Do you feel like that shaped sort of where you are now, or it changed how you felt growing up as a member of the Assemblies of God?
I think it made things really confusing for me because, you know, I had like this certain expectation from the culture and like sort of the attitudes that I grew up with, and then being exposed to something that was completely different. It was like it kind of helped. I mean, really, the whole experience helped plant some of those seeds of doubt, you know, from that age. But like, you know, as I got older, you know, that those seeds of doubt began to grow.
I suppose that when you are grown up being told that your faith is the one and only true faith, and
Yep.
the only one that can save you in a doomsday apocalyptic sort of based faith that like the one that you grew up in, to meet people that you really sort of bonded with and had these connections with who were parts of other faiths, to then be told that they won't be saved, or they, you know, they are damned because they aren't part of the Pentecostal faith or the Assemblies of God specifically, must have been a difficult message for you to understand, especially when you're just kind of creating friendships with these people who seem just the same as you are.
Well, right, exactly. And it was like, you know, it was like all these cool people and all these nice kids that I'm friends with, all these people are going to hell. And then like all these kids who will, you know, maybe never have an opportunity to really like provide for themselves or have a career or have even just clean water or food. Like these people are going to hell. That just like I still accepted it, but that just didn't sit right with me.
And did you ever think to yourself that sort of age-old argument of atheists and members of other faiths who say, why would there be starving children in the world if God truly existed?
Well, I was never exposed to those arguments again, you know, really sheltered, you know. That wasn't something I was exposed to in my schoolwork or anything like that.
And did you ever express your concerns about the friends that you'd made and the people that you'd bonded with about what would happen to them if they didn't convert to the Assemblies of God? Sort of with your parents, siblings?
I just don't know if at the time I was mature enough to like ask those types of questions. Mm-hmm. Like I probably thought about it in my own mind, but then, you know, like cognitive dissonance just kicked in and I was just kind of like, okay, whatever, you know, I just think about it and move on, you know, type of thing.
Well, not only think about it, but the idea is there, and it's kind of, even if it lives dormant for a little while, it's planted and it's stayed, as you've mentioned. So that's not something insignificant to write off, because we might not be having this conversation today if that thought didn't take root somewhere at some point. So that's still important to highlight, I think, for maybe other people who are listening who have had similar experiences where they've had thoughts and feelings that they may not have understood at the time or may not have explored at length.
Right, exactly.
That has still remained sort of there in the background, maybe pressing forward a little bit occasionally, but then being pushed away again until the time is right for you to go forward and explore those thoughts. But you mentioned that your mum actually did contract malaria and fall incredibly ill during your time in Togo. How did that happen? Was it a gradual illness? What does malaria look like when it strikes?
So malaria is transferred through the blood, and there are tons of mosquitoes. Tons and tons and tons of mosquitoes over in Africa. And so you know, every mosquito bite is like, okay, am I gonna get malaria?
Oh my goodness.
Like, what's
okay.
gonna happen, you know? And I'm outside and me and my brother are outside all the time, and we're getting bit constantly, but both of us never got malaria, and then my parents, they go outside, get bit once, and they're like, contract malaria. So it was just kind of one of those things where, my mom got bit, she got malaria, and I can't remember if it might have been her first or it might have been her second time getting it. I can't remember, but because I know they got it, like both of them got it a few times. I just can't remember like how far apart those were, like how many times it was. But like it was, getting malaria over there was extremely common. It's not like something rare.
Right. So it'd be like the common cold over here, sort of the sniffles.
Yeah, or like the flu, like seasonal flu.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. Of course, it's
may be something that you
different.
get it may be something that you get like once or twice a year or something,
Okay. And when it strikes, are there sort of telltale signs that somebody has it, or is it different for each person?
I don't know how long it takes to really kind of set in and become a full-on illness, but it's pretty much, it's almost immediately. And it's the way that it's been described to me, because I never had it, but the way that it was described to me was like a really, really, really bad flu, like really bad, like body aches, intense fever, intense nausea and diarrhea. Sometimes you're not like, some days you're not going to get out of bed, you're just not even really going to get up, and it's even a struggle to get to the bathroom. And my mom had this very intense bout with malaria for about a month and a half, which usually takes a few weeks to get over. Like that was like the normal, like maybe 2 to 3. I mean, it would just depend really, but usually it would take about 2 to 3 weeks to get over. And she almost had this thing for 2 months.
Whoa. Okay. And is this like constant bed rest when you have it this severely?
Yeah. I mean, after a few days, you get bored and you think you're going to try to shake it off, and you try to get up, and then it's like, nope,
right.
You just go right back to bed.
So do you remember your mum sort of really struggling at this time?
Very much so. She was very much struggling. And I mean, it was severe enough that we really didn't know if she was going to to be able to stay there. We thought that we maybe had to get her, go back to the United States and maybe get her medical attention, because it was really bad.
So you're there for how long have you been in Africa at this point before this strikes?
So we had been in Africa at that point for about 2.5 years.
2.5 years is a pretty significant time for somebody your age. So you've uprooted your life from America. You've made you've made substantial roots over in Africa. Your mum gets so severely sick that you realise that you are going to need some sort of intervention in terms of advanced medical healthcare assistance. So you decide to go back over to America for the foreseeable future, or is this supposed to be just to get your mum the medical care that she needs?
Well, we were going to come back anyway, like I said, because my dad was going to need to raise more funds to go back over there. So we were going to go back to the United States anyway. Okay. But she actually ended up getting over her malaria before we went back to the United States.
Okay.
That the decision to stay was because my mom was like, I don't know if I can get that sick again. Like, I don't know if I can do that again.
Right.
It was that intense and that hard for her, because, I mean, I don't know, exactly what she was feeling like I said, because I've never had malaria before. But she legitimately thought that she might die. I mean, it was that intense. So.
Wow, that must have been so bad for her if she has said, like, I will, to your father, I'll support you on any journey that your calling has given to you. I will, we'll uproot the family. We'll move it over to Africa. I will educate the kids myself and, and help them with their curriculum, and to go through all of that with your father. And then for her to have this illness, it must have been so severe for her to say, like, I cannot stay here, because if I get that sick again, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get through it a second time.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was very, and I would say that moment was a pivotal moment in her entire life, because after that, she really was never the same. As far as, it didn't just change her, like, it didn't just change her, I don't know how to really describe it. It didn't just change her as far as, like, her health. It changed her personality as well.
Right.
Like, that moment changed. I mean, and she just became, she's a lot different from that moment on than from my childhood. Right. that I remember her, she just got a lot more intense after that.
Intense in terms of her devotion to her faith?
I would say so, yeah.
I guess that sort of event could have many different effects on your spirituality. And if your parents are already quite devout in their faith anyway, I mean, speaking from an outsider's perspective, I might be way off the mark here, but you could maybe all have an experience where you think, well, I'm obviously not devoted enough, otherwise this wouldn't have happened to me. And This is punishment for me not following the scripture, or not being, not praying enough, or not giving enough time to the church. Or you could have the other effect where you have that seed of doubt that we talked about earlier, where you decide, well, why I've given my whole life, and I've moved my entire family, and we've done everything that we can in the name of the Assemblies of God. So why would I get this sick? Right. So I suppose that there could be like those two fighting. I don't know. I obviously, I'm just kind of speculating here on what might happen to different people in that situation.
Well, you're kind of right on the money there. I would just put it in terms of the Pentecostal culture, and coming from that angle, these types of, like, bad illnesses, and really any negative thing that happens in your life where your faith is being tested, these are looked at as attacks from the devil. These are looked at as, like, what they call attacks from the enemy. And my mom, I think, really felt like her faith was being tested, and that she was being attacked by the devil with this illness. And so, yeah, it's not surprising that she just kind of went further into the faith, and became a little more intense. That's I couldn't articulate an explanation for that, but it makes sense to me that that's what would happen.
Right. And so you make the move back over to America. Are you moving back into the house that you lived in before you left?
So we went back to my hometown for a little while. And then my dad ended up getting a youth pastor job in a different town within the same state, the state that I grew up in. And he got a youth pastor gig in another town. And I was about 12 or 13 then. So, I've been out of the United States pretty much my whole time during puberty, and by whole time, like, kind of growing up in a pivotal point. And so I've been out of American culture during, like, some of the most pivotal growing up in developmental years of my life. And so that really kind of played a huge role in my teenage years.
Okay. And again, sort of, you've left a group of friends behind before you move, and then you've made another set of friends whilst in Africa, and now you're back sort of where you were before you left. So are you reintegrating with old friendship circles, or are you starting again in terms of finding people with common interests and people in your peer group? Have things changed significantly since you were last at home?
Yeah, things had changed significantly, and it was pretty much like starting over for like the third or fourth time. Yeah.
Oh, goodness. And what age are you now? You're sort of 15-ish?
13. I was 13, or like 12 going into 13 when I moved there. So I was, I don't know what your like grades there are, but I was in 8th grade.
Right.
At that time. So, just before high school, just entering high school age-ish.
And that's from what we see from mainstream American TV shows and films, reaching that high school age and finding a group that you feel comfortable with is quite a difficult thing to navigate. And I don't know if this is true for everybody. I know it was for me in terms of finding a group of peers that I felt comfortable with and kind of navigating high school itself. But in terms of, we've seen shows like 13 Reasons Why that highlights all of the kind of stereotypical difficult things that somebody might experience whilst they're in high school. For you to not have an idea of where you will position yourself or place yourself at this time, was that something that made you anxious, uncomfortable, or were you kind of just going with the flow?
A little bit. I had kind of been accustomed to going with the flow at this point.
Of course.
So I was kind of just going with the flow again. And I'm lucky. I've got the personality type of like, I'm not super extroverted, but I'm friendly, and so I make friends pretty easily for the most part. And so again, the community that was there at that new church, I was able to make friends and get myself established there, I'd say relatively quickly, and make a new friend group. What was difficult about that is that a lot of my friends were in public school, and I was still being homeschooled, and I had been homeschooled my entire life. And so, I was still kind of like, even though I was friends with people, I was still like very much sheltered from American culture and the secular world. And so that could be sort of difficult at times. Even by my friends, I was kind of sort of made fun of for that.
And was that something that continued through your high school years, or did it change as you became kind of more established as your own person going through the educational process?
Well, I was homeschooled all the way up until I graduated. So, I stayed pretty sheltered within the evangelical Christian bubble for a lot of the time. Now, I think by the time I had reached my teenage years, I believed 100% in everything in the theology and everything that I was being told at that point. But like, I wasn't, because I was a teenager and I had interests outside of the church. I wasn't always like 100% in, like I wasn't like always like completely on board with whatever the church was doing at the time. So like, for example, like during worship, I wasn't like way into the worship or anything. I think maybe I had periods of time during high school where I tried to get into worship or whatever, or like tried to like really get into like the Bible and stuff, but I was just kind of like half in and half out. I wasn't really like as devout as like my parents were.
Did they have any thoughts or feelings about that?
Oh yeah, they did. Not, I mean, I don't know so much about my dad, but especially my mom had a lot of thoughts and feelings about that. You know, she used to tell me like, something. I don't know what verse this comes from, or if it's even in the Bible, but like basically not to be like a lukewarm Christian. You know, you're either on fire for God or you shouldn't be a part of it at all. And so, you know, I remember having like many different conversations like that with her.
So you've come back over from Africa, and you said that your mum's intensity around her faith sort of changed after her experience with that bout of malaria. And then you're having these complicated and tense conversations with your parents about your lukewarm attachment to your faith. So did your parents' stance around their involvement with Assemblies of God change after you returned to America? Did they reintegrate back into your old congregation, or did things change significantly after you'd returned?
I would say after my dad got hired as the youth pastor for that new church, and you know, by this point he was a little bit older. You know, I think he was like in his later 30s, early 40s, so he wasn't exactly like the young youth pastor that he was in the 90s. And he was kind of trying to do the same sort of things and kind of use the same strategic approach that he used for evangelizing at the church that he did in the 90s. And I think there were a lot of factors that had changed, especially within culture at that point. And so like it didn't really those strategic plans didn't really work at this new church. He tried, but he didn't really kind of, I don't think he was necessarily satisfied with the results of that church, but he really, really liked where we lived, and he really liked the church, and he really liked the community a lot. I just think that he was kind of outgrowing that youth pastor position.
Right.
He just wasn't that young guy anymore. And so like within the youth group, you know, my parents are the youth leaders and I'm attending the youth group there. And so I'm being surveilled and being controlled and watched constantly. I'm being controlled at home. I'm being watched at home because I'm homeschooled. And then I'm being watched at youth group, and that's really the only thing I have outside of the home, you know? And so that was really difficult because, I mean, it was really difficult for me, and it was probably really difficult for them. You know, a lot of factors there. You know, I'm the first son, and, you know, so a lot of their rules and things are being tried out on me first.
Yeah.
And then you know, and then I'm going through kind of normal coming of age type of stuff, and they kind of see that normal coming of age stuff as sort of a threat to my faith, you know.
Yeah,
and
sort of typical
there was a
teenage
big
rebellion as a sort of perhaps the devil or demons taking position. In you as a.
I think a big factor too is like the cultural shift from the evangelical movement in the 90s to the 2000s. It was just completely different. You know, like with, especially with the internet and stuff, and the beginnings of social media, it was changing things, and I just don't think that they anticipated that.
Do you feel like it's kind of more in keeping with the satanic panic of the 70s and 80s than it was of the 90s?
Well, I mean, there was kind of a big satanic panic type of stuff going on in the 90s, so that definitely influenced them, and that carried over into the 2000s. And after kind of that whole thing had sort of been kind of debunked, you know?
Yeah, it's something I'm researching at the moment. And when you said there that the 2000s was different to the early 90s, I wondered if it had kind of had that, because we kind of work in cycles. And that's why I thought it was interesting that we were talking about the Azusa Street revival and the Second Great Awakening, because I feel like with some of the other stuff that we were discussing before we hit record, with the radical evangelical movement in America at the moment, merging into some of the QAnon stuff, or community members of both parties colliding into having those dual belief systems, that if we might actually be approaching the third Great Awakening, or maybe even the fourth. I don't know if there's like a third in there somewhere with all of these new religious movements that we talk about on the show. But that's why I thought it would be interesting to ask you sort of what the views were around pop culture and influences, satanic influences. Like Harry Potter gets mentioned a lot on the show about how that was forbidden for a lot of people in various Christian branches and sects, and other worldly influences like music and things that may be inviting the devil and demons into your heart, your soul, your beliefs, and your home.
Right. Well, it didn't become super clear to me how separated I was from the secular world until I became a teenager, because I wanted to be a part of the secular world, you know? I didn't want to like separate myself from what was going on in American culture, and you know, the different ideas of secular culture versus the theology that I grew up with, or the ideas that I grew up with. It didn't necessarily become clear to me until I became a teenager how separate I was, because you know, not being able to watch even some PG-13 movies. I mean, that R was like no question, definitely no rated R movies, but like except for Passion of the Christ, of course. But
that's fascinating to me. Okay, I'm gonna make a quick note of that.
I know that's kind of a big sort of joke in evangelical circles, is like, yeah, you're not allowed to watch rated R movies, but Passion of the Christ is okay, where, you know, it's the most gory and violent and most traumatizing thing you could ever see, and they show that to children too. I mean, that's wild to me.
No, yeah, that is. Oh my goodness. Okay, yeah. So sorry, I kind of butted in there with my piqued my extra interest in talking about the Passion of the Christ. But you were sort of discussing how it was for you in terms of things that you were encouraged to stay away from, or things that were restricted from you.
Yeah.
Like PG-13 titles that I imagine every other child your age outside of your church or other similar high demand religious groups would just be kind of going to the cinema with their friends or the theater to go and see on a weekend.
Yep. Yeah. And like, even like some PG-13 movies, I don't know. I can't think of like one off the top of my head that was like big at the time, but like, you know, there would be like a movie that I heard that was really good, and I couldn't go see it with my friends because there was like some sort of explicit or sexual content in it, or, you know, whatever the case may be, whatever they wanted to keep me away from. Like, you know, I couldn't go with my friends, and these were friends that went to my youth group even. You know what I mean? It's not like their parents weren't keeping them away from it, you know? So, you know, so that, like, even though like I had like a really good friend group there, and I'm still friends, like really close friends with a lot of people from that youth group, it definitely made me feel alienated, and like, I started to definitely feel different than other people at that point.
I've just kind of had a quick look there about Mel Gibson and the Passion of the Christ, and it one of the quotes in an article on the Scotsman said, "For Gibson is a passionate member of the Catholic traditionalist movement, a minority but growing Catholic sect that rejects the reforms of the Second Vatican Council in 1964 to 65, in particular the abolition of the Latin Mass. The passion is nothing short of a party political broadcast for this movement, if only in the crude way Gibson's earlier Braveheart was propaganda for the Scottish National Party." So it's interesting if The Passion of the Christ is a movie that is allowed for all ages, because it's not even like it's in keeping or aligned specifically with Pentecostalism or the Assemblies of God.
No, it's just kind of a part of that whole it's just kind of a part of like that whole evangelical Christian circle, it's not really
the true story of Christ, the true story of what happened to Christ in all its sort of biblical gore.
Exactly. Yeah,
we know
that really experiencing that, and like really taking that in, and the heaviness of what Christ's sacrifice was for us is really like, what they're trying to get across to everybody.
And those things that are used to describe imagery around sort of the hell and brimstone and fire and burning and all of those really difficult images that are portrayed to children that talk later on as adults on this podcast about things that traumatized them when they were young, around this imagery in the books and things that they were read in their youth groups. It's kind of easy, I suppose, in that way then to see why the Passion of the Christ was such a hit with denominations all over the world, no matter how their Christian faith aligns in terms of the very difficult map of tracking, sort of where that branch came from which other movement it branched off from originally to begin with. So I suppose in that way, even though it's not specifically aligned to the Assemblies of God, you can see why that movie would be one of thumbs up, I suppose, within the community.
Yeah. Well, you're traumatized with things like this from a young age. And so like by the time you get to Passion of the Christ, when you're a teenager, it's like, it's just, here's one more thing to be traumatized by,
Mm-hmm. And you see the scenes of the crown of thorns. And you're like, I've learned about this. I know all about this, and then you're seeing the males going in.
Yeah, the cat of nine tails, like that was like a big scene in the Passion of the Christ. I remember they would even play clips from that in sermons sometimes.
Oh my goodness!
To make a point about something, I can't remember off the top of my head, but like, that was like a big major scene with like the cat of nine tails, and he's whipping Jesus, the Roman soldiers whipping Jesus with the cat of nine tails. And that is just horrifying. I mean, it would be even hard for me to watch now.
It's so interesting to think about Hollywood and pop culture and how disassociated it is from mainstream religion, but then also how intrinsic it is at the same time, and how some things are okay, but others are not okay. It's kind of almost like when we've discussed the Jehovah's Witnesses before on the show, and there have been meetings with elders when somebody says, I have had experiences with another person sexually that I was not comfortable with. Actually, I was an unwilling participant. And then that person is then like the perpetrator is then brought into the elders meeting, and they say, well, Jehovah, he'll have to answer to Jehovah. And so kind of that issue is dealt with. And then it's kind of like, but if you were to go and say, oh, I had this experience and I was a willing participant, the person happened to be a member of the same sect, it's like, oh, well, this is sort of grounds for disfellowshipping. It's almost like some things are okay in one hand and then others are absolutely not okay in the other. So it's like you can't go and watch any of these PG-13 films, but this R-rated film, we'll let this one slide just because, you know, it really does highlight the difficult things that Jesus went through. And I feel like there's something so wrong and exploitative about that mentality and mindset. I don't know. It's hard for me. I'm having one of those moments where I can't sort of
Well, I mean, coming from what you're talking about, that was such a difficult thing for me, especially getting older, is like a lot of these things just seem so arbitrary is the right word. I don't know. It seems so weird to me that, like, you know, the Passion of the Christ is okay, but I can't watch, you know, like a funny PG-13 movie, or, you know, like dating is okay, but only if you go this far, like you can't go past this limit. Or, you know, it was always like just these weird rules as I got older where I was like I just want to be left alone and just to do my own thing. You know what I mean? But it's like you never can, because your salvation is kind of always hung in the balance. Like,
yeah.
It seemed like, especially with Pentecostal background, it's very like outward and like very like kind of works based. And so it's like if you're not living out what they're teaching you there, you're sort of just like my mom was talking about, like kind of just like being a lukewarm Christian. And like for the really devout people, they have a problem with that, and they take issue with that, and they make that known publicly in the church.
I suppose as well, from a popularity and financial standpoint, I believe that in America, it's always been more than 50% of the population in surveys that are taken will align themselves with a Christian sect or label themselves as Christian, whichever sect or branch they identify themselves with. I believe it's always over 50% since like the 1980s, 70s or 80s onwards. I don't know if it's increased or decreased in these last few years. Maybe it's done a bit of both, you know, since sort of the 2016 election onwards. I think maybe there's been some changes in mentality around that. But perhaps Mel Gibson just saw a market and decided that was the one that he was going to speak to. Because if you're not allowed to watch any R-rated movies, but The Passion of the Christ is one that's kind of, allowed for any age group to watch, then is that like not bankrolling an entire majority population of an entire country? I don't know if this is just me kind of again speculating, but maybe it's clever business that he has taken part in with releasing that film and advertising it to a particular community group.
Yeah, as I've gotten older, I've become more and more cynical of that stuff. And so I'm kind of right there with you. Like, I think that's very strategic.
I suppose that the next part for us to get onto then is to ask you if you're having these difficult conversations with your parents about perhaps being a 50-50 member of the Assemblies of God at this point is whether you actually made a decision to distance yourself from the church, or how, when, and why did you decide to leave? And was there extra pressure included in that because you were, as you mentioned, the oldest child? You were supposed to set an example. You are the fourth generation of your family to be involved in the Assemblies of God. What did that entire sort of segment of your life look like?
Well, at that time, I around 14, 15 years old, I was still fully a believer. I really believed in everything. Those seeds of doubt that we talked about earlier, those kind of continued to grow. And then there was new seeds of doubt, once I kind of developed older teenage relationships there. And then, also having a romantic relationship as well. There were other seeds of doubt that kind of came in there. And then, when I was 16, 15 going on 16, we ended up moving again. And my dad decided to start his own Assemblies of God church with my uncle in another town in Iowa.
And how did that come about? Was that another sudden decision, or was that something that was explored before the final decision was made?
Yeah, it was another calling.
Right. Okay. And at this point, do you accept that information differently to how you accepted it when you were told that you'd be moving over to Africa? This one
frustrated me a lot more.
Right.
This calling frustrated me a lot more because, this was going to be the third or fourth time we moved.
Right.
And I thought I was going to be there for the rest of my life, well, not for the rest of my life, but I thought I was going to be there for a while. I thought that my parents would retire there and stick around there. And I established very close friendships. And like I said, I'm still friends with these people today. So I established really close friendships there and a romantic relationship there as well. And so, it was very difficult for me to move again. I felt, I just felt almost heartbroken in a way that I had to leave all my close friends and the life that I had worked so hard to try to reestablish, and moving again. Now, in hindsight, I am thankful that I ended up moving again, because the place where we ended up moving to, I'm here now, and I really enjoy it. I like it. I'm glad I didn't stay in that town, but at the time it was very difficult. It was very, very difficult. And, I'm in the middle of high school. And so, I have to make friends again in the middle of high school. And it was definitely a lot harder this next time around than it was before.
And do you feel like this kind of contributed perhaps to your decision to move away from the faith as a whole?
There were definitely some more seeds of doubt that got sown along the way after I had moved here, because I became even more involved with people who were outside of the church that had nothing to do with the church. Since my dad was planting a church from scratch, there was no community or place that I could go to where there were already an established congregation there, right, that I could be a part of. And so, I felt the first year was really hard. I felt very alienated and isolated from people in my peer group.
The church that your father is building from scratch, is it literally being sort of built from the ground up, the actual property itself?
So how church planting works is usually the church will find a venue or someone's home to kind of start at, and it's usually like a smaller congregation and just kind of word of mouth sort of thing. And then once once people are kind of tithing regularly and sort of there's sort of wealth being built within the group, then people will start making moves to like rent out a space, like within, for example, like within a school cafeteria, or like an office room, or something smaller, where the church will meet. And then as the church continues to grow, and sort of the wealth of the church continues to build, then they usually make moves towards getting their own building or having their own building built.
Okay.
It's a very difficult process to do if your church is kind of average or not really growing. So it's kind of all based on growth. But my parents actually ended up getting an old Pentecostal church that was ended up being given to them by the person who used to own it. So that was kind of given to them as like kind of like a gift to the Assemblies of God.
Okay.
And I don't know the whole story behind that, but that kind of just, it's one of those things that kind of further implants in my parents' mind that they're doing the right thing, and
Of
that
course,
God,
yeah.
everything's just going to work out, and God's going to provide, and has nothing to do with luck or anything else at all. So,
And what is your mum's role to be in this next step for your father? Does she have an idea of what her position will be, or how best to support your father? Or is she kind of left feeling like she doesn't know what her position or role will be at this point?
So, my mom, she's always, as long as she's been in the church, she's always had some sort of a leadership role, especially like within the youth group and stuff, just being kind of a general youth leader. But I think it's been kind of difficult for her to sort of kind of find her role as a pastor's wife in the church. She really likes to pray with people. She really likes to talk with people. My mom is, very personable and nice, So, so she does a lot of that now, like at their church. She, she'll pray with people and stuff. But I think it's been, I don't think she could even tell you, like what her quote unquote role is.
Right. Okay. So
she's kind of always been a like a homekeeper, a housewife, since we were kids. I mean, that's kind of just how she's always been, and she's kind of happily accepted that role.
So at what point did you make the official decision to move away from the church? And were you still living at home at this point? How did that go down with your parents?
Well, I moved away from the church and Christianity in general when I was about in my mid-20s, about 24. And it's kind of a long story. But basically, a lot of those seeds of doubt, that kind of kept creeping in as I got older, and as I got to be a teenager, kind of kept building up, and it was kind of getting. As I got older, I was faced with tougher questions, and like having more life experiences, where it was kind of tough to reconcile my faith. And in my early 20s, I kind of became really devout, and I would say that that's kind of like when I really chose to be a part of the Assemblies of God myself, versus like my parents kind of forcing me to be a part of it.
Okay.
And you know, like even though I had those seeds of doubt and stuff when I was younger, I still believed 100% in everything that was being told to me. And so I wasn't like devout, but I was a true believer. Like I believed everything. I believed in the rapture. I believed in hell. I believed that Jesus was the Son of God. I believed in the Holy Spirit. I believed that the Holy Spirit was capable of making people speak in tongues and healing and doing miraculous signs. I believed all of that stuff, 100%. And so, in my younger years, in my early 20s, you know, I had before that, I had never really thought about like really what I wanted to do in my life, and no one ever really encouraged me to sort of seek that out. You know, I never really had permission to sort of explore and sort of have hobbies or passions to pursue. You know what I mean? I had things I was interested in, but it was always like, well, if that isn't going to save people and bring people to Jesus, then what does it really matter? You know,
Right.
It's kind of like the whole attitude that devout Christians have, especially in the Pentecostal church too, that you know, if it's not bringing people to Jesus, then kind of doesn't really, it's not really legitimate, you know. And yeah, there's like this whole idea of like God gets the glory for everything. So like, you know, even growing up, like middle school into high school, and then into my early 20s, you know, I would say that like, I had to sort of like, my interests and hobbies and things that I liked had to sort of take the back seat. And what happens when you kind of bury those things is that like you start losing yourself. Like you start becoming what the church wants you to be and not like who you truly are on the inside. And that's what I always felt growing up, is that I always had to die. Like my part of myself had to die in order to be what the church wanted me to be and be who I thought God wanted me to be.
Right.
And so, you know, by my 20s, you know, I have no interests. I have really no career choices. And so I decided to become involved with my parents' church. And it's always been a smaller church, a smaller congregation, and it's a small congregation now. And so, you know, I was going to start getting involved in my parents' church. And for whatever reason, you know, I was going there and being involved and helping with kids ministry and things like that. And like, you know, helping with the media and stuff on Sundays, and just like trying to help and do and be where my parents needed me and do anything that I could do to help. I was committed to that. So I started going there for a while, and I thought that, like, you know, things in my faith were really good and that I was starting to grow spiritually. And then for whatever reason, there came a point where, like, I wasn't getting anything out of Sunday service anymore. Like, the sermons, like, just were, like, not resonating with me. I didn't feel like I was really getting anything out of it or growing spiritually anymore. And I don't really know why that is, but I wasn't getting anything out of it. So I tried to sort of get into some of these other evangelical mega church pastors, because a lot of their material and things were online. And so I started kind of getting into that, like listening to that kind of really just kind of opened me up to different perspectives about Christianity. Because even though like the people I was listening to would probably mostly align with, what my parents taught at their church and kind of the same types of theology, there were still like things that were different about it. And that sort of like opened me up to the possibility of maybe you could do Christianity a different way, And then, I started really kind of getting into what they call apologetics, which is like basically like it was really just debating and arguing on behalf of the church and on behalf of like biblical theology and stuff. And so like I would watch these debates on YouTube and stuff where Christian scholars would debate secular scholars and things like that. And, just more seeds of doubt were sown there, where it was just like, it just seemed like once my faith was put up to critique or scrutiny, it really didn't seem to hold or be 100% true. And so that was, that was another seed of doubt that started to grow is like, maybe this isn't 100% true. And I believed it was 100% true. And the reason why I sought those things out was that I thought it would stand up to scrutiny, because that's what I was taught.
Right.
I was taught that this does stand up to the secular world and can hold on its own. And, what I found out was that it really doesn't. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But as that started to kind of go on and I started to kind of open myself up more to different points of view, even then I was still, I still believed 100% in everything. And I ended up getting married in my early 20s. And, for me and my wife, the early point of our marriage was really difficult for us. We were encouraged to get married young when we probably shouldn't have been encouraged to get married that young. And, the transition from dating into marriage wasn't very long, and it was a very difficult process to get acclimated to. And we had a really rough patch in our relationship, and I thought that that this was the person that God wanted me to marry. I really felt that that God had chosen this person for me because that's what I was taught, and that's what kind of purity culture teaches, is that God has the perfect person for you. Mm-hmm. And that once you meet that person, that you'll know that that they're the person you're supposed to be with,
Right. And
so once we kind of had that rough patch, and I didn't know if things were going to work out, and I didn't know if that relationship was going to last, I kind of, that was like the final straw. Like that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. I was like, if this person is really supposed to be for me and it's not working out the way that it's supposed to, then what else has God told me to do that like wasn't supposed to be for me? You know what I mean? It was very confusing to me. I did not understand it at all. I did not get it at all. That like a possibility of that relationship might not work out. Like that was not in my idea of all of what that was going to be like. So, all those seeds of doubt basically came to a head at that point. And so then I didn't even really tell my parents. I kind of just sort of left the church, and they asked if I was going to come back, and I said no. And so then I started down the process of like kind of deconstructing my not specifically Pentecostalism Christianity, but just Christianity in general. I kind of started deconstructing and sort of figuring out, where does the Bible come from, and how was the Bible written, and who was Jesus, like the historical Jesus versus the Jesus of the Bible, and
Right.
Things of that nature. And then once I like had looked into it, there was no doubt in my mind that that I not that I was fooled, but that that I never really got to analyze the information before I was a part of the church, and I never got to choose the church for myself.
Right.
And even if I did get to choose the church for myself, that information was not privy to me or anybody else in the church, Like there's like a lot of people talk about now, like informed consent when it comes to groups and businesses and religions and stuff. And like I felt fooled because it was like I never got to see the other side of it. I only got to see one side of it. You know what I mean? So, and then, as I started to heal and kind of find myself again, over the years up until now, and then I started looking into the Pentecostal background, and, the more I did the research, basically, the more I was able to heal, because I know now that like none of that stuff that was taught to me was based in reality. It just was not based in reality at all. It was stuff that was very biased, and that had been whitewashed over thousands of years and also hundreds of years. In regards to Pentecostalism, that whole history has been completely whitewashed, and a lot of people don't even know where Pentecostalism comes from and what the roots are. Other than the Azusa Street Revival, not a lot of people know much about Charles Fox Parham or his theology or anything. So once I was able to research for myself and see everything for myself, and make a decision that I wasn't going to be a part of this anymore, everything just got better from there. Like I was able to heal. I went to therapy, was able to get help in therapy. My relationship with my wife got better. We had our daughter, and, that's been a huge blessing.
Wow.
And, ever since I left the church, my life got better. Everything, I unlearned all those toxic things I was taught, especially like we were talking about earlier with, sort of the patriarchy, sort of masculine, purity culture, or, guys have a role and women have a role to play. And it's like very, complementarian instead of egalitarian. Once I kind of unlearned all that stuff, and saw it for what it really was, my life got way, way better, and I'm way, way healthier now than I was before.
Wow.
When around the time I was leaving, I was what I consider to be a pretty sick person.
That's so much information that you've given us in sort of that summary there on your journey out. But it's incredible to hear about how positive your life became once you distanced yourself from the church entirely. Do you feel like that there was any struggle during that transition period where you would go to take part in perhaps things that the church would not condone, things that you were encouraged to stay away from your entire sort of childhood and upbringing?
Yeah. Well, and it's like, I never wanted to separate myself from the secular world like my parents wanted me to. And even when I was devout, I still didn't really separate myself from the secular world all that much. I still had friends that like were non-Christian, and still kind of went through the whole coming of age stuff. When you get older, like college age, where you experiment and things like that. And so I was still, even then, even when I was at my most devout, I still wasn't like 100% in. And I could never figure out why. I could never figure out like why I wasn't like 100% into it. But now I know is that like it was the part of me inside that I had to bury all those years that was like still trying to hang on and still trying to like push me to do things that I was uncomfortable with,
Yeah.
And once I was able to let go of all that stuff, I didn't have to feel guilty about those things anymore. It was like a weight had lifted off of me. Like and like another big thing for me too was that, I was so scared of the rapture and of hell. And, that's something that I've been traumatized with over and over again since I was a little kid, since I was, literally, toddler age. To not believe in that anymore and to shed that toxic belief off of me was like another huge weight. Is like, okay, not only do I not have to feel guilty about just being a normal regular person in the world and like growing up wanting to be a part of the secular world, not only do I not have to feel guilty about that, but like I don't have, like, I'm not going to hell for that. And I'm not like, my eternal destiny isn't like totally doomed because I did those things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's the important message for people to take away as well from what you've said there in your big sort of summary around your journey out, is that even though you were encouraged to be separate from the secular world growing up, it hasn't harmed you during your integration into those things and having those experiences. So even though it was something you were encouraged to stay away from, it hasn't been detrimental to your health or your growth or your well-being. It's actually been quite the opposite. And I think that is quite a powerful message for people who are worried about what awaits them on the other side.
Yeah, and that was the thing too, is like none of it at all was negative, even though I was told that if I were to, quote unquote, go down the wrong path or go down the into the secular world and go down that path and reject what I had been taught, that, I think you probably heard this from other evangelical people before, where, I was going to become a drug addict, or I was gonna, be in a really extreme situation if I left the church, which is was just a total lie, and everything that I had been a part of in the secular world were all positive experiences. I really did not have very many negative experiences. I'm sure there were maybe some, but for the most part, it was all positive. And, another thing that the evangelical church or Pentecostal church kind of fully rejects and doesn't really give legitimacy to is mental health problems. And so when I got therapy and I was able to talk to a therapist about some of my problems, that was another thing that was just like huge, that really, really helped me, going to a licensed professional was amazing for my mental health. And that's something that I never would have been encouraged to do before. And if I did, I'd go to a Christian counselor, which Christian counselors here in the United States, their credentials are very suspect.
Right.
There might be some Christian counselors out there that are legitimate, but I don't think there's very many.
And do you feel like sort of what you've said there is some of the advice that you would give to others who are looking to leave similar high demand religious groups, in terms of going off, doing your own research on the Pentecostal church and understanding the roots and the history of the faith and the movement altogether, and then specifically as the Assemblies of God, and then seeking out professional therapy or professional help to aid you and assist you on your exit from the Assemblies of God? Do you feel like that's sort of two things you would suggest to people? Are there other things that you might say could help somebody who's thinking of doing the same?
Yeah, 150%. I didn't have somebody that was like educated in religious trauma, and so I kind of had to sort of educate them myself a little bit, which, if therapy is something that you're paying for, I probably wouldn't advise people to do that. That's kind of throwing money away. But find somebody that is educated in religious trauma and has like sort of a background and is a professional in that field and knows about religious trauma. That way they can help you and really get the help that you need. And yeah, I can't encourage people enough to research critical or unbiased information towards whatever group or religious background you're a part of. You should get a chance to look at both sides. And if you've been in a religious group, you already know their side. You already know what their you already know the theology they teach. You already know what story they're trying to tell people. So I would encourage anybody who's thinking about leaving or who has left to really do the research. The internet is amazing. It's a wonderful resource that we have in the 21st century. I would definitely use the internet to try to look into these things. And I know that like a lot of people that come from my background don't know a lot about the Pentecostal background. Anything that I've said on this podcast today about the history of Pentecostalism, don't believe me. Go and research it yourself, I would say, because, I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. This is just the research that I've done and what I've found. And to be quite honest, comparing the two, it makes the information that's critical of the Pentecostal church and Assemblies of God makes a lot more sense to me than the story that they give themselves. So, but that's just my opinion. And that was just the way that I was able to deconstruct my religious background. So,
and of course, the exit process is going to be different for every person. But if people are thinking about or looking for places to start or unsure of where to go for resources, there was a whole host of great resources that you sent me over in some of our first correspondence to one another over email, which I will include in the episode description. But I think what you've said there are some very easy, soft sort of, especially the research side of things, very soft approaches to learning more about the church and maybe solidifying some of those thoughts or beliefs that you've had that you haven't nurtured or had the opportunity to think critically about. And I know that we often suggest therapy and then often follow that up by saying that not everybody has access to professional assistance or help. And so the internet is such a wonderful tool. It's come on such a long way in the last 10 years in terms of people being able to gather, as you said, non-biased or critical pieces of information about these high demand religious groups that exist in the world, mostly courtesy of other like-minded people who have had the forethought to nurture those seeds of doubt that they've had themselves and then move away from the group, write about their experiences and allow other people to realize that there are a fair few people in this world who have decided to move away from religion altogether, or even just their congregation or just their particular sect of faith, or convert to another group and then another group and then another group and then write critically about all of those groups because they've realized that every single one of them has not been as clear-cut as one would assume if you only attend one or two services from that particular faith-based group. So you've given us so much to think about and ponder on. And I think that your perspective around the upheaval of you and your family moving across America to a different continent to perform missionary work, to then move back over to America and have that reintegration, and then your parents deciding to actually open up their own church and to be the leaders of their own sort of congregation itself is not something that we've heard about on the show before in this respect. So I think that you've definitely given us a different perspective that we haven't heard about before. The missionary work, I understand, is still quite prevalent amongst many Christian sects and faith-based groups within America who travel far and wide to proselytize, whether that be to other parts of America or other parts of the world that have never seen Caucasian people in their lives. So that's such a fascinating thing to think about and to discuss. So thank you so much, Jordan. And also, I should point out for anybody listening that Jordan is actually a patron of the show as well. So aside from offering us his experiences and personal thoughts and feelings around his life and upbringing and these things in the show, he actually supports the show on the Patreon group as well, which is fantastic. So thank you so much for that, Jordan. I always write in the group how appreciative I am, but it's not often I get to actually sit down and have these lengthy one-to-one chats with people who are patrons of the show. So it's been great to sit down and chat with you today.
Yeah, Casey, thank you so much for having me on. I really, really appreciate it. And I just want to say, too, that your show has been huge influence on me. I love listening to people's stories and other people's experiences and their backgrounds and different religious or high control groups. And I can't thank you enough for the work that you're doing, because it, in a lot of ways, a lot of the episodes, when I listen to the other episodes, it's kind of like my therapy, it's the religion and the rules and the things might be different, but the kind of the method of control is kind of the same, and I can really relate to
absolutely
a lot of those people's stories.
Those earmarks are so similar, and I think that's why a lot of these different conversations are so important, even though the subject might sound different in the title, the overall conceptions that are explored in the episodes are often extremely similar. So I'm so glad to hear that it's helpful, and I hope that it's the same for people tuning in and listening. And it's a privilege for me to be able to have these interactions with these people that come and speak on the show, and to bring this work to the wider public. So without people like yourself supporting the show, but also coming to speak with me on the show, we wouldn't have the platform that we have today. So really, the thanks does lie with you, the people that tune in, the people that provide us with these testimonies and these stories, being, sort of brave enough to come forward and chat on record about the experiences that they've had. So thank you so much for your time today, Jordan. I know I've already scratched the surface. We didn't talk about, where your parents are now, or your relationship with them. And I know that you've mentioned that they still kind of run their congregation today and their own church today. And I always feel like the new slogan of this show is going to be like, we've only scratched the surface. But that is how I feel I feel like I've done such a disservice to everybody at the end of every episode, because I never have the time to get through everything that we've wanted to get through. But if anybody has any questions for Jordan, if they want to know anything that we didn't touch upon, or if they want to have answers to things that we didn't get a chance to explore in the episode, please just email me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com and get in touch and let me know. And I will be releasing this episode on the 4th of February and getting in touch with you, Jordan, to let you know that that's gone live. And thank you so much for your continued support, and I hope you really enjoyed the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Casey. Have a good one.
Take care. Speak to you soon, Jordan. Bye.
Bye.